Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy Emirati, and I am Assistant Director of our ACU Online Writing Center. I welcome you today to our webinar on planning a focused critique. Keep in mind that when we release this webinar to our website, we will also share the PowerPoint slide deck, and it will have links that you can click on to access various materials used during the webinar today. So first, here are our learning objectives for this webinar. We will use COMM 586's Week 5, Assignment 1, Training Environment and Training Manual Critique to 1. Understand the process of developing a critique. 2. Move from general criteria to specific recommendations. 3. Practice critiquing a specific text. And 4. Suggest best practices for creating a similar text. Our learning objective 1 is to understand the process of developing a critique. So, what is a critique first? A critique is a detailed review and analysis to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of a resource. Our process to develop a critique may be as follows. First, identify the criteria for evaluation. On what standards will you base your judgment? Next, review the text. What are its purpose, intended audience, and characteristics? Third, analyze the structure and content of the text. How does it compare to the evaluation criteria? 4, assess the value of the text. Based on your selected criteria, what are its strengths and weaknesses? And 5, argue your assessment with examples and reasons. Let me give you a very simple example based on a text I interacted with recently when I was putting together a chair for my son. The chair came with an instruction manual that is intended for me as the buyer to understand how to put the chair together so that it stays together and it's very safe. One criteria for evaluation for an instruction manual is that it should have diagrams that show you how the different parts should be assembled, and it should have clear text to support those diagrams. So in this instruction manual, the diagrams were not particularly clear. As an illustration, the chair came with different size screws, but the manual did not differentiate between what type of screw needed to go where in what step. So it was very hard to figure out how to put the screws in order to make the chair be put together safely. If we compare this to the evaluation criteria of having clear diagrams, obviously that is going to create a weakness in this particular instruction manual. And in order to summarize my argument with examples and reasons, I might say the instruction manual was inadequate because its diagrams did not clearly label what type of screw needed to go in to which part of the chair, which kept me from ensuring I was putting the chair together in a safe manner. So after that little example, we're actually going to look at the assignment for this week's webinar, COMM 586's Week 5, Assignment 1, Training Environment and Training Manual Critique. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the links in the PowerPoint deck that you can access on our website will be live, so this link is active. Here is the assignment preamble. Purpose. Have you ever experienced a training session where the chairs were uncomfortable, the room temperature too hot or cold, dreary walls, and poor lighting? I'm sure you have, and that you can add additional factors interfering with the learning process. Along with the information in Wrench, Chapter 4, utilize the information from the following. This resource is called Checklist for Training Environment, which we will look at in a little while. As you can see, it is important to consider your trainees as well as the training environment when planning a training seminar or workshop. In this assignment, you are to identify environmental and other trainee needs for your upcoming trainee seminar. Instructions. For this assignment, you will be writing an 800 to 1,000 word paper that will help you consider the environment of your training and critique a training manual to help you analyze the materials that you are creating for your own training presentation. Address the concepts listed in parts 1 and 2 below as you craft your paper. Part 1, Training Environment. As trainers and facilitators, it is crucial to optimize the training environment for effective learning outcomes. Consider the following factors for your upcoming training seminar. Ethical and environmental challenges. Reflect on the ethical considerations and potential environmental issues that might arise in the context of your training seminar. It could include factors like wastage of resources, carbon footprint, or inclusivity issues. Propose ways to address these issues. Physical environment. Consider physical factors such as seating arrangements, temperature, ventilation, and sound. How could these aspects become challenges? How will you mitigate the challenges to ensure a comfortable learning environment for your trainees? Physiological needs. Long training sessions require attention to the physiological needs of the participants. Detail the food and beverage provisions, scheduled breaks, and opportunities for physical movement to ensure comfort and attentiveness. Social, cultural, and psychological needs. Reflect on the diverse backgrounds of your trainees. How will you ensure an inclusive environment that respects different cultures, languages, and levels of acquaintance among participants? Ethical activities. Suggest activities that will not only address the environmental challenges, but also increase trainees' attention spans and motivations to participate. That was part 1. Now here are the instructions for part 2, the training manual critique. Download the Brain Fitness Training Manual, which we will also look at in a few minutes, and review it thoroughly. Despite its shortcomings, it also exhibits certain strengths. Identify 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of this manual, providing reasons for your choices. Then suggest best practices for developing effective training materials. Paper submission specifications. Your paper should adhere to the following structure and format. Introduction. Briefly introduce the focus of your paper. Body. This is where you detail your analyses for parts 1 and 2. Conclusion. Summarize your key findings and wrap up your discussion. For the format, you need to ensure that your name and the word count are displayed in the upper left corner of your paper. Follow APA style for in-text citations and your reference list. Remember that excellent assignments will adhere to the prompt, stay on topic, and be virtually flawlessly edited with strong support. The word count for the paper should be 800 to 1,000 words. Here also is the assignment rubric. If you look at the different criteria, you're going to notice that part 1 on the training environment carries the bulk of this rubric. 75% of your points are from part 1. Part 2, the assessment of the training manual is 15 points, and the remaining 10 points relate to organization, easiness to read, free of grammar and spelling errors, meeting the word count requirement, and being formatted according to APA guidelines, and MAC-MR-CONR writing expectations. I do invite you to set up your draft using our ACU APA course paper template. I've set one up as a sample, and I'm going to stop sharing this screen and start sharing my other screen so that you can see what that looks like. Okay, here's my template. You can see that I have put the student's name and the word count in the upper left corner. In the upper right corner of each page, I have a page number. Here is my APA style title page. The title goes to the top in bold. Then we have the student's name, the affiliation and the university name, the course, the instructor, and the due date. On the next page, we will repeat the title at the top. We will include the introductory section required by the assignment. Then I've split the body of the paper into 2 sections. The first section has an APA Level 1 heading. That means that it's centered and in bold, and that's labeled Part 1, Training Environment. Under that, I've created subsections for each of the areas outlined in the assignment. Ethical and environmental challenges, physical environment, physiological needs, social, cultural, psychological needs, and ethical activities. Now, you'll notice that these level 2 headings are in bold and they're flush with the left margin. And under each of them, I've just pasted the questions in from the assignment to give me a starting point for writing. I've done the same thing for part 2, where we have another level 1 heading, bold and centered. It says Part 2 Training Manual. I have a brief introduction for that section. And then I have subsections for the strengths, the weaknesses, and the best practices as outlined in the assignment. Remember that the conclusion does get a separate heading. And then on the next page, you will have your resources listed under the heading References in bold. So we will come back to portions of this as we work on drafting some arguments later. For right now, I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. Now that we've discussed the assignment in general and seen how to lay it out, we're going to move on to learning objective 2, which is move from general criteria to specific recommendations. So first, we need to consider what the general criteria are. In this case, your assignment has actually given them to you. You need to evaluate your training environment based on some general criteria, and they've listed them as ethical and environmental challenges, physical environment, physiological needs, social, cultural, and psychological needs, and ethical activities. Again, they've given you descriptions of each area, and you can use those to generate ideas. We also need to consider the readings for the module. So for this first section on generating a description of your environmental setting and other considerations, you might want to look at these resources, of course. They mentioned using your textbook, so that one's up here. Another one that is useful and essential for this part 1 of your paper is this resource, the checklist for training environment. If we click on checklist for training environment, you'll go to a document like this in Word. It's called a checklist for analyzing the learning environment by Roger Heemstra from Syracuse University. We are going to write the APA reference for that using Heemstra's last name, his first initial. Then we don't have a specific date for it, so we'll put ND in parentheses. The title is a checklist for analyzing the learning environment. And since it's part of your course at ACU, you can put Canvas at ACU and put the front page or entry point for our Canvas. Heemstra, comma, ND in parentheses will be your parenthetical citation in APA style. Or if you write Heemstra's name in a sentence, you can write Heemstra, parentheses, ND, close the parentheses, indicated. So in Heemstra's document, we have various other criteria set out that will relate to the criteria given to you in your assignment. We have an area on sensory concerns, furnishing concerns, seating concerns, general concerns, social and cultural concerns, and psychological concerns. For right now, we're going to see how Heemstra's criteria compare to one aspect of the assignment criteria. And I went with physical environment. So again, we have sensory concerns, seating, furnishing, and general concerns addressed in Heemstra's chart or checklist. And then for physical environment, your assignment reads, consider physical factors such as seating arrangements, temperature, ventilation, and sound. How could these aspects become challenges, and how will you mitigate these challenges to ensure a comfortable learning environment for your trainees? After we find our literature and consider the question, what do we need to do next? You need to ask yourself, how do these criteria that are found in my resources apply to my training population and setting? So I'm going to give you an example. Let's pretend that my training is going to be one to help students with autism on our campus engage in study strategies that may be helpful to them to navigate their coursework or other situations on campus. Um, so I have my heading for physical environment. First, I'm going to write a sentence that tells the reader what I'm going to address. And I'm going to relate it to my own context. In this case, I'm going to relate it to my population too. Because my training audience will consist of individuals on the autistic spectrum, I must closely consider factors related to sensory issues and seating. Now I'm going to give an example. Heemstra and D noted that for all audiences and learning settings, one should address noise reduction, temperature, and glare. This relates to my point about sensory issues. And I'm tying in my literature from Heemstra to show that, first of all, this is where I've gotten my idea, and I need to credit Heemstra appropriately. But also, I want to show my instructor and the rest of my readers that I am basing my recommendations on literature that we've been asked to read for the course. That makes what I'm saying more reliable. So after I explain the recommendation, I'm going to go through and apply that directly to my setting. So here's what I wrote. The classroom where I will conduct my training is located on a hall where no other events will take place at the same time, minimizing external noise distractions. Regarding temperature, the room has an internal adjustable thermostat, and participants will be advised to dress in layers to accommodate individual preferences. And then here's a problem that I thought of. Glare may become a concern as the sun shines directly on the east windows during the time of the training. So how am I going to deal with that? Therefore, I will adjust the blinds to direct the glare upward to avoid discomfort. And I'll give you another example for the rest of the paragraph, because in my first sentence, I mentioned sensory issues, but I also mentioned seating. So to explain that, I'm going to go back to Heemstra again. Heemstra and D further suggested that learning environments should incorporate adjustable or alternative seating choices to address ergonomic concerns among individuals with varying physical characteristics. In the conference room at my training site, the seats are padded with straight backs and allow for swiveling and height adjustment. I will also make available balance ball chairs for participants who feel this seating alternative will better support their comfort and focus. So, what did we just do? We moved from the general to the specific by reviewing each criterion from the assignment, reviewing the literature related to each criterion, and then applying the criterion to make suggestions specific to my fictitious training participants and setting. To complete part 1 of your paper, which again is 75% of your rubric score, you want to go through this process for each of the criteria listed: ethical and environmental challenges, physical environment, physiological needs, social, cultural, and psychological needs, and ethical activities. This brings us to our learning objective 3, practice critiquing a specific text. This relates to part 2 of the assignment, the training manual critique, where, remember again, we need to download a specific training manual identify 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses, and suggest best practices for developing effective training materials. Remember our process to develop a critique, which we previewed at the beginning of our webinar when I spoke about the none too stellar instructions that came with my son's chair. 1, identify the criteria for evaluation. On what standards will you base your judgment? 2, review the text. What are its purpose, intended audience, and characteristics? 3, analyze the structure and content of the text. How does it compare to the evaluation criteria? 4, assess the value of the text. Based on the selected criteria, what are its strengths and weaknesses? Finally, argue your assessment with examples and reasons. We're going to go through each step for your project. First, identify criteria for evaluation. This time, you don't have a specific list given in your instructions, so you're going to go to your course resources to find the criteria to evaluate this training manual. There is a content page entitled Creating Powerful Learning Materials, Enhancing Training and Development for In-Person and Online Delivery that you may find useful for step 2. You also have the readings by Knott and Larkham. They are both from the TechSmith blog website, and they provide information on creating user documentation and creating a training manual. So, when we click on the link for the Creating Powerful Learning Materials resource, it's going to take us to a page in Canvas that looks like this. We do not have an individual author labeled on this page, so we're just going to consider Abilene Christian University Online to be the author. We'll put Abilene Christian University Online. Again, we'll use ND because there is not a specific date labeled. We will put the title in italics and sentence case, meaning only the first word of the title and the subtitle, and any proper nouns, but there aren't any proper nouns, would be capitalized. They have it labeled a content page, so I put content page as a descriptor in brackets. I put Canvas at ACU as the website, and then I put the entry page to Canvas because according to APA, when you cite a course resource like lecture notes or a PowerPoint, you put the entry page for the intranet. We will also review how to cite quickly. We can just say Abilene Christian University Online, comma, ND if we're writing a parenthetical citation. Or if you write Abilene Christian University Online in a sentence, you would then put ND after it in parentheses. So this is the source. And if you scroll down the page, you're going to find some criteria for evaluation that may be helpful to apply to the training manual that is given for this assignment. It refers to creating powerful learning materials for in-person delivery. It mentions clear organization and structure. In in-person training sessions, learning materials should be organized logically with a clear structure that aligns with the session's objectives. Use headings, subheadings, and bullet points to enhance readability. It mentions incorporating visual elements such as diagrams, charts, and infographics to illustrate concepts and enhance understanding. Use high-quality visuals that are relevant, concise, and visually appealing. Third, they mention interactive handouts. Provide interactive handouts that engage participants during the session. Include space for note-taking, reflection prompts, or interactive exercises that promote active learning and participation. It also mentions offering supplemental resources. And this is certainly not the expanse of this entire resource that they've given you for this module. That's just part of it that I'm using so that we have something to compare to the training manual when we look at it. Now, because our next step is to review the text. You have a link where you can download the Brain Fitness Training Manual. This is what the cover looks like. I am going to stop sharing this screen and then I'm going to switch to showing the training manual. So we have the front page, which we saw a moment ago. We have a welcome note that says, "Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are very excited to be here for this workshop on the aging brain and how to deal with the aging workforce. These issues are becoming more prevalent in today's society and as we age ourselves. The current workforce is about to have a brain drain as the baby boomer generation considers retirement. This generation is unlike others in the fact that they do not necessarily want to leave the workforce. However, they do not want to continue working at their current pace. Therefore, managers need to be aware of this fact, as well as how to utilize techniques to cultivate and retain their aging workforce." So we can see the purpose of this workshop is going to be how to address the aging workforce, help them maintain brain health, brain strength, and overall vitality so they can continue performing at high levels even as they get to be a little bit older. And it seems that they are targeting managers because it says managers need to be aware of this fact and of techniques they can utilize to cultivate and retain the aging workforce. So they have objectives listed for what they will do during the workshop. Understand the signs of brain aging and how the brain works. Name ways to prevent brain aging. They have a workshop schedule. It says at 1 o'clock the workshop will begin. Table of contents. Another page with the picture of the brain. Okay, here we have a demographics page. It says, 1 in 4 Americans between the ages of blank and blank has at least a part-time job, and blank of the baby boom generation intends to keep working past the age of blank. It has an asterisk. I'm not quite sure what that means. We have another quote down here that has 2 asterisks. Again, I'm not quite sure what that means. But you will remember that one feature mentioned earlier in our resource was that having an interactive format would be a helpful way to keep people engaged. And apparently they have fill in the blanks here. So this may be something that we want to note as we are critiquing this text. Here's some more fill in the blank. Here we have additional narrative, more fill in the blank. We have headings. Sometimes the headings don't appear to be on the same page. Here's a heading at the bottom, but the information that follows the heading is on the next page. We have some more of these asterisks. And here we have some references. Final thought. And that was the end. Okay, that was just a quick tour. You will certainly have more time to look through it in more detail. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to sharing my PowerPoint so we can continue on our critiquing journey. So we have quickly reviewed the text in question. The next thing we need to do is analyze the structure and content of the text. So I've drawn a table. These are criteria from that Abilene Christian University online resource. I wrote down the notes that they had about visual elements, incorporating visuals like diagrams, charts, and infographics. And I wrote down the note about interactive handouts, where if you encourage note-taking, reflection prompts, or interactive exercises, it promotes engagement and participation. Those are our criteria. Let's see how it compares to the training manual. So as far as the visual elements, we didn't see a lot of that. It had a repeated visual of a brain that was not particularly appealing in design or color. It didn't have any diagrams, charts, or infographics. You'll remember on one page, It had blanks for you to fill in about some sort of statistics, but it could have had a visual there to reinforce that, and it would have made the statistic more meaningful. As far as interactive handouts go, though, it did encourage interaction through fill-in-the-blank notes. So let's consider the value of the text based on strengths and weaknesses. A strength is definitely that it encourages interaction and attention through its use of the fill-in-the-blank format. However, this is questionable. Its use of visuals was not particularly engaging, and it missed out on some opportunities to have visuals to support statistics or share other information. So, after we have done our comparison, we need to argue our assessment with examples and reasons. So, under the strengths heading in my template, I started a paragraph like this. The strengths of Pounds and Worley's ND training manual include interactive note-taking, and then I just left some blanks because I only have noted one so far. Now, here's my example and my reason. Interactive note-taking supports attention as it encourages participants to engage actively in learning experiences. This reason is backed up by my reading of Abilene Christian University Online's resource. The training manual incorporates this strategy because the notes contain blanks participants must fill in during presentations. So there is my example about the fill in the blanks and my reason using literature to explain how this is a positive feature. I would continue this paragraph. I would use some transitional language. A second positive feature is, and then go on. Now let's look at the same thing with weaknesses. I might want to begin my weakness section this way. Despite its strengths, Pounds and Worley's ND manual features significant weaknesses. Here's an example. For instance, the manual does not include charts, diagrams, or infographics that could help learners better understand key concepts. This is an idea that I've taken from the ACU page, so I've written Abilene Christian University Online ND here to show that this part of my sentence is borrowed from them. The rest of it's my own idea, so I'm continuing on, such as the percent of the US population comprised by the baby boomers. It would be cool to have had a pie chart or a little infographic with a person representing a certain number of people in our population, and we could visualize then how much of our population actually consists of baby boomers in the US at this point. Now, to continue on writing, I would use some more transitional language like another concern is, and then I would go on. So we have assessed our target text. The next step, a next learning objective as well, is to suggest best practices for creating a similar text. This is the last part of part 2, the training manual critique. The very last line says we need to suggest best practices for developing effective training materials. So, how are we going to brainstorm those? While critiquing Pounds and Worley's Brain Fitness Training Manual, you've reviewed several resources along the way that told you how to create effective training materials. And now it's your turn to define best practices for the structure, content, and presentation of such documents. So, consider, as you have, the impact of the strengths and weaknesses of that brain fitness training manual on you as the reader when you were reading it. Did those visuals in there, those missing visuals or the brain image really bother you? Did it decrease your engagement? What would you do differently to avoid that weakness? On the other hand, did you really like that strategy of having that fill in the blank element where someone could interact? If that's a strength of the text that you'd like to emulate in your own materials, you could mention that as a best practice, interactive materials. Also, there may be things that the module resources mentioned that you didn't see in the brain fitness training manual. So based on the module resources, what other best practices would you incorporate? I answered these questions to give you an example. So, what would I do differently to avoid weaknesses? I would not have inadequate visuals. That was a problem. Based on the module resources, what other best practices would I incorporate? I remembered reading one of the blog posts that were provided in the readings for the week, the one by Larkham, 2022. They wrote this, and it relates to visuals as well. The best training manuals are easy to follow, informational guides. They lay out concepts in clear language using relevant examples and imagery. Done right, a good training manual becomes a trusted resource for employees and managers or customers and clients. So, based on reviewing the Brain Fitness Training Manual and seeing this in LARCOM, I have written this to suggest a best practice. Under my best practices subheading, I've written a review of the course resources, including the Pounds and Worley ND training manual, informs a list of best practices for developing effective training materials. This sentence tells the reader I'm getting ready to list my best practices. Another transitional word I have first. First, planners should ensure that a training manual is easy to follow and uses accessible language and attention-grabbing visuals to relay rich information. Obviously, that was based on what we've already discussed about the brain training manual, but also I'm going to cite Larkham 2022 here because that's where I have paraphrased this idea from. And I could continue on sharing additional best practices, and I might want to start with a transitional word like next. So we come to the end of the informational portion of our instructional portion, rather, of our webinar. Today we use COMM 586's Week 5 Assignment 1, Training Environment and Training Manual Critique to understand the process of developing a critique, move from general criteria to specific recommendations, practice critiquing a specific text, and suggest best practices for creating a similar text. The remainder of this webinar will be a few slides about the services we have at the Online Writing Center. You can check out the Online Writing Center homepage in My ACU. Watch this video for steps to make an appointment and submit a paper. Remember that we work with you at any stage of your writing, and we do offer two types of appointments. For an asynchronous appointment, you upload your paper and we will send you feedback by email within 24 hours. We also offer real-time appointments, meaning that you can speak to a tutor via phone or Zoom. Just go to the schedule and click on the Zoom link at your appointment time. We also have a bunch of writing-related resources on the Online Writing Center website. We just went over that you can schedule an appointment online, and then your second step would be to submit your paper to this week's Canvas box. You can contact us at the Online Writing Center at acu.edu. You can use this link to schedule an appointment and this link to visit the Online Writing Center website. Some of the resources we offer include our APA course paper template, which I showed you earlier in our webinar. We have a YouTube channel with other webinars available, and we have our Online Writing Center blog with some helpful blog posts and good thoughts to get you in the mood for writing. Some of the other webinars we have available that may help you with this assignment include our Intro to APA 7th Edition webinar and our Intro to Graduate Writing and APA Style. And we now come to the end of this webinar. I thank you for going through this learning process with me, and we look forward to working with you soon at the Online Writing Center.